That winter in Dry Creek was unlike any Isaiah Carter had ever endured. Snow piled so deep the wagon wheels of the town lay locked fast in the frozen white. Yet in that harsh season, a story began. Isaiah rode a broad-shouldered gray, his frame tall and straight, as though carved into the saddle. Folks in town were used to the sight. The brown-skinned man in a dust-worn coat, a face cut in hard lines, seldom showing a smile. He lived mostly alone on the northern high plains, coming down to Dry Creek only when he truly needed salt, cartridges, or a sack of cornmeal. Many called him the loner of Wyoming, and he never bothered to set them straight. That day, Isaiah came for little more than tobacco, Winchester rounds, and a few bags of meal. But as he swung down in front of the general store, another scent cut through the cold, a smell warm and rich, drifting from a bakery 2 doors down. Fresh bread. In the dead of winter, that fragrance felt like a gentle summons. He turned to walk toward it, and that was when he saw her. By the trash barrel outside the bakery knelt a figure, a girl. Thin, trembling, her bare hands digging into the wooden bin for scraps. Her dress might once have been fine, but now hung in tatters, sleeves frayed, hem dirty and stiff with ice. Her black skin burned red from wind, lips cracked, and when she pulled out half a charred loaf, she bit into it like heaven itself had dropped it in her lap. Isaiah stopped, his eyes locked to the sight. It wasn't cheap pity that struck him. It was the raw sense of life being ground down, a spark near gone cold, one breath from vanishing. The bakery door flew open. A shrill woman's voice cut the hush of falling snow. "Get out! You tramp! Digging through my trash, are you?" The baker's wife, face red from the oven heat, raised a broom like a weapon. "Come back again, you filthy runaway, and I'll have the sheriff on you." The girl flinched, crumbs spilling into the snow. Her wide eyes brimmed with fear, but she spoke no word in her defense. She shook not just from cold, but from the shame of being cast out in the open street. Isaiah stepped forward. His shadow stretched across the white, blocking the wind from her. The woman hesitated. Few cared to cross Isaiah Carter. He said nothing, just pushed through the bakery door. "1 loaf fresh from the oven," he said, voice rough but steady. The woman scowled, grudgingly wrapped a hot loaf. He set coins on the counter, turned, and walked out. The girl still crouched, arms wrapped around herself. Isaiah knelt before her, holding out the steaming bread. "No woman should ever have to beg for bread," he said. She lifted her face. Large dark eyes shone under lashes wet with snow. In them he saw more than hunger. He saw exhaustion mixed with a stubborn pride, a flame flickering in storm winds. She hesitated, as though the gift might vanish. At last her thin hand brushed his, trembling as she took the loaf. The touch was brief, but it made Isaiah's knuckles tighten. Her whisper cracked, broken by the cold. Thank you. I wasn't trying to." He shook his head. "Eat." She tore off a small bite. The sound that left her throat was half a sob, half a breath of relief, as though life had returned at the edge of death. Tears welled, but she turned away, hiding them. She ate quickly, hands trembling, as if someone might steal it from her. Inside, the baker's wife called out loud enough for all to hear. "That's the runaway from the Aval wedding. Took jewels, they say, and fled. Now she's digging garbage," whispers rose along the street. Isaiah didn't glance their way. His own eyes stayed on her. Got somewhere to sleep tonight? He asked low. She hugged the loaf to her chest, shook her head. Only behind the saloon, near the stables. They let me stay if I keep quiet. Isaiah studied her a long moment. Then he pulled the wool scarf from his neck and laid it across her shoulders. It smelled of smoke and horse, rough against her skin, but warm. She froze at the kindness. He rose. Don't wander. I'll be back before sundown. Swinging into the saddle, he disappeared into the storm. She sat still, clutching the scarf, breath turning white in the air. For the first time in weeks of running, her chest eased from its ache. His figure had vanished into the snow, but the coarse wool around her shoulders still carried his warmth, a thin shield against the world. Her name was Celeste Brown, though no one had asked it. Yet in the silence he left behind, in the memory of his steady gaze, she knew she had not been erased. The wind rolled down from the northern ridge, sharp as a whip across frozen eaves. Celeste Brown kept to the main street of Dry Creek, Isaiah's scarf drawn tight about her shoulders. The coarse wool scratched her skin, carrying the smoke of campfires and the sweat of horses. Yet that rough scent made her feel safer than anything else. She slipped behind the Dry Creek saloon, where nights swelled with banjo twang and the coarse laughter of cowhands. Behind it stood a rough row of stalls, the air heavy with sour whiskey and damp hay. There she had often curled against bales, clinging to scraps of warmth. Tonight was no different. She pulled the scarf higher across her face, sank down against the cold wall, clutching what remained of the loaf Isaiah had given her. Half was gone. The rest held tight as treasure. But Dry Creek was a small town, and word traveled faster than the wind. In the few hours since the baker's wife had shouted, Celeste's name had become the town's amusement. "That's the runaway from the Whitaker wedding. Heard she stole his jewels before bolting. Figures. Look at her, a beggar now, bet she's fooled plenty of fools already, or she'd never have lasted this long." The voices carried through the wall, sharp with mockery. Celeste sat still, fists gripping the scarf. She had learned to turn herself into a shadow. When the world spat names at her, survival meant swallowing the protest down into her chest. Yet the words cut deep, for they weren't all false. She had run, she had carried something away. But not jewels, only her mother's keepsake, something no one had the right to take. The moon rose, spilling a pale light into the alley. Cold drew her breath in quick white clouds, each one fading fast as though her life itself thinned with it. Hugging her knees, she whispered broken prayers. The sound came first as footsteps, measured, deliberate, meant to be heard. Celeste stiffened, fingers groping the hay for the splintered plank she kept hidden. Her heart hammered, ears straining as though each beat were a drum in the stillness. A figure broke through the moonlight. Tall, lean, a wide hat dusted white, shoulders burdened with storm. She knew him instantly. Isaiah Carter. He said nothing at first. He simply stopped, watching her a moment. Then he lowered himself, unrolled a folded wool blanket from his shoulder, and set it across her lap. Celeste froze, lips parting without a sound. He did one more thing. From his coat, Isaiah drew a knife, small steel handle worn smooth, the blade catching moonlight sharp and bright. He placed it at her feet, no word of explanation. Her eyes widened, her hand still clutching the broken plank. Isaiah tapped his glove against his knee, voice low. "Sleep comes easier when you've got something to guard yourself with." The words lodged in her throat. Since when did any man, a stranger at that, treat her as though she were worth protecting? Tears slipped, hot down her cheeks, biting cold as they froze. Isaiah reached no further. He only brushed snow from his gloves, rose to his height. His gaze lingered on her face a long, steady moment. It held no pity, no hunger, only something firm, as if he had taken on a duty he would never speak aloud. Celeste's breath shuddered. Her fingers touched the edge of the blanket, coarse and heavy. When she looked up, he had already turned away, his frame swallowed by the storm. She sat silent. The knife gleamed silver at her feet. The blanket weighed warm across her knees. Its scent, smoke, pine, leather, clung to her skin, mixed with the salt of tears at her lips. For the first time in months of flight, she no longer felt unseen. Isaiah Carter's eyes, steady, quiet, and deep, burned into her memory. A fire low and smokeless, yet strong enough to hold back the night. That night, while Dry Creek settled and the banjo strings inside the saloon fell silent, Celeste still held the blanket close, her hand brushing the knife's hilt again and again. In the dark, she realized something. That first look, the look of a man who did not see her as refuse, might be the one thing keeping her alive until morning. The next morning, a thin strip of sun broke through the heavy gray clouds, casting a weak glow across Dry Creek. Snow melted from the eaves, dripping in slow rhythm onto the frozen ground. Behind the saloon, Celeste Brown sat curled tight, Isaiah's blanket wrapped close, the knife hidden in her palm. Sleep had not found her. The warmth of the wool soothed her body, but the echoes of whispers and scorn from the day before circled endlessly in her mind, keeping rest at bay. She chewed the last of the bread, slow and careful, reminding herself she still had reason to live. But hunger was no longer her only fear. The name Lucas Aval hung over her like a noose. The rumor had already spread. She had fled her wedding, stolen jewels. A lie twisted into truth by repetition, enough to mark her guilty in every eye. Hoofbeats struck the frozen alley. Celeste stiffened, clutching the knife. But the rider was no pursuer. It was Isaiah Carter. He reined in at the mouth of the lane, his eyes sweeping once before settling on her. "Come with me," he said, voice low, leaving no room for refusal. She rose slowly, legs stiff with cold. He caught her elbow, his calloused hand brushing chilled skin. A brief touch, yet it sent a sharp ache through her chest. There was no force in it, only a steady assurance that steadied her in return. He led her beyond the edge of town to a hunter's empty shack. The place was dark, but at least it broke the wind. Isaiah lit a fire in the stone hearth, waited until the smoke cleared, then sat. Celeste lowered herself across from him, clutching the blanket as if it were her only shield. In that silence, she knew it was time. The weight she carried could no longer stay hidden. Whether he turned away or not, she had to speak. "They say I stole," Celeste began, her voice trembling yet firm, "that I took the Aval jewels and ran." "They're only half wrong," Isaiah said nothing. He leaned forward, set another log on the fire, then lifted his gaze. Calm, steady. That look invited her to go on. "I took nothing that wasn't mine," she whispered. "It was my mother's. A silver pendant shaped like a laurel. She gave it to me when I was 10. But Lucas Aval," her voice caught. "He claimed it was part of his gift, that if I refused to marry him, he would brand me a thief." The firelight flickered over her face, her dark eyes shining with pain far older than her years. "My father," She bit her lip until it bled. He forced me into that marriage. Said it was the only way to save our family after the war. But I couldn't. From the first moment, Lucas looked at me like I was property. Then I saw him strike a servant girl. I knew if I stood in that chapel, my whole life would be chains. Her chest rose hard with each breath. The words burned her throat, but once freed, they carried a strange relief. So I ran. I took only my mother's pendant, and now the world believes I am a thief. Tears filled her eyes, yet she lifted her chin, pride cutting through despair. I would rather bear shame forever than live as the wife of a cruel man. The shack held its silence, broken only by the snap of burning wood. Isaiah sat still, firelight tracing the lines of a weather-worn face. At last, he gave a single nod. No judgment, no pressing question, only a quiet recognition. His eyes spoke what his mouth did not. He had heard, and he believed. Celeste shivered, not from the cold, but from the sudden lightness in her chest. For months, her truth had been locked inside, mocked and denied. Now someone had taken it in without scorn, without accusation, as if her pain had a place in this world. She looked at Isaiah. The fire glowed in his eyes, deep and unyielding. That one nod was stronger than any vow. She turned away, hiding the tear that slipped down her cheek. For the first time, she no longer felt utterly alone on her road of flight. The world could brand her guilty, but one man had chosen to stand still, his gaze a harbor. That night, when Isaiah led her back toward the saloon's shadow to keep her hidden from town eyes, Celeste drew the blanket tighter and clutched her mother's pendant close. In her mind, his nod remained, echoing like a quiet flame, a small fire keeping her heart alive where she once thought it had gone cold. The road north of town stretched like an endless ribbon of white, flanked by snowbound prairie and stiff pines locked in ice. The wind tore through, carrying the echo of hooves like a distant drum. Isaiah rode ahead, straight-backed, his silhouette stark against the gray sky. Celeste sat behind him, her fingers gripping the worn saddle, careful not to cling to him, leaving a narrow space between them. The scarf still hung around her shoulders, carrying the faint smoke and hearth-fire scent that reminded her the silent man before her had been the only one to reach for her when no one else would. The ride lasted hours. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, Isaiah drew rein before a cabin hidden in the pines. Modest in size, roof-pitched and sturdy, a thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney, proof this place was not entirely abandoned. Isaiah dismounted, holding out a hand. Celeste hesitated, then laid her thin fingers in his. His palm was calloused, steady, warm enough to steal her breath for a moment. "This," he said, his voice low, nearly lost in the wind. "My home." Celeste looked around. The cabin stood as if it belonged to the earth itself, stripped of any softer touch. Windows bare of curtains, rough-hewn chairs, walls dark with age. A man's dwelling, built to endure, not to live in. No flowers, no grace, only silence. Isaiah opened the door, letting her step first across the creaking floorboards. The air carried pine resin, cold ash, and tanned hide. Clutching the blanket to her chest, she glanced about like a trespasser in the den of a beast. Isaiah followed, laying down firewood without explanation. "Sit there," he said, pointing to the chair by the hearth. He worked with ease, coaxing flame from tinder until fire leapt alive. Celeste flinched when sparks flew. Isaiah's gaze softened a fraction. "It won't harm you." "Fire minds those who handle it right." He fetched a kettle, heading to the well outside. Celeste rose as if to help, but the bucket's weight bent her arms. Isaiah returned in time, his hand closing around her wrist, taking the bucket before it spilled. "I'll do it," he said simply. The touch was brief, but it left her skin burning, not from shame but from the strange kindness she had never grown used to. They ate cornbread hard as stone and strips of salted meat. Celeste nibbled. Isaiah ate in silence. No idle questions, no probing words. Each time she dared lift her eyes, his gaze lingered only long enough to see her, then moved away, as though granting her the space she needed. Afterward, Isaiah placed a small pile of wood before her. "Try it," he said, passing her a match. Celeste's hands shook as she bent over the hearth. The flames sputtered out. Her head dropped in frustration. A broad shadow loomed behind. Isaiah stepped close, kneeling beside her. His breath warmed her ear as his large hand covered hers, guiding her motion. "Not too close," he murmured. "Give it air." The sun, fire caught, flared bright, dancing in her dark eyes. Celeste lifted her face, and in that glow, met his gaze only inches away. His face bore the scars of weather and years, yet his eyes were steady as winter skies. For a moment, her heart stumbled. Isaiah drew back first, leaving her the space again. She sat frozen, her hand still tingling where his had steadied it. Night fell. The fire's glow painted the walls in amber warmth. Celeste remained wrapped in the blanket, unsure where she belonged. There was only one bed, narrow, straw-filled, covered in a thick hide worn by winters past. Her eyes flicked from bed to floor. She stammered, "I can sleep here, near the fire." "You don't need to give up." Isaiah didn't answer right away. He crouched, spread his own blanket flat across the planks by the door, indifferent to the draft that crept through the gaps. Straightening, he met her eyes, voice rough. "This is my house. Guests take the bed." Celeste opened her mouth to protest, but his gaze allowed no refusal. Not force, but certainty. She yielded, perching on the bed's edge, clutching the hide tight. Strange, yet in the cabin's fragile warmth, her body eased, unburdened for the first time since her flight began. Isaiah lay on the floor, his back to her, blanket drawn to his chest. He spoke no further word. The fire dimmed, shadows lengthened. Celeste turned once, seeing only his broad shoulders and hair dusted by snowmelt. A man rough and quiet, choosing the ground so that one branded a thief could rest on a bed. She pulled the hide to her face, her eyes burning. For the first time in months, she lay upon a real bed, hearing the winter wind at the eaves, and inside her heart stirred one fragile truth. Perhaps she had not been wholly abandoned. The first days in Isaiah's cabin passed slowly, though never easily. Celeste Brown had never known the frontier life of self-reliance. Each morning, while frost clung thick to the grass and the sun bled a pale streak over the horizon, Isaiah was already awake, coat on, splitting wood, feeding the horse, checking his traps. Celeste sat near the hearth, clutching the hide he'd given her, watching his figure fade into the pines, unsure what place she could claim in a world so hard and spare. One morning, Isaiah came in with 2 heavy buckets from the well. He set them down and looked at her. "You'll need to learn this." The first time she gripped the wooden handle, the weight pitched her sideways. Water sloshed cold over her hands. Isaiah stepped in, steadying the yoke beside her, his voice low by her tangled hair. "Don't strain all at once. Let it rest in your hips. Step slow." She followed, halting but steady. The buckets reached the cabin without spilling. When she set them down, she lifted her eyes. His gaze carried no praise, no mockery, only calm. It was enough. For the first time, pride flickered in her chest. In the days after, Isaiah taught her to tend fire. Celeste fumbled, smoke stinging her eyes until tears streaked her face. He never laughed, never sighed. He only sat near, his rough hands guiding hers, shifting the wood. "Let it breathe," he repeated. The third time, the fire flared bright. Celeste gave a startled laugh, a sound foreign in that silent room. Isaiah glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching upward, before he turned back to the woodpile. As chores grew familiar, Isaiah began teaching her to ride. The gray horse loomed tall, daunting. The first mount left her stiff, fingers white on the reins. Isaiah walked at her side, his hand on the gelding's flank, voice steady. "Loosen your legs. Think of him as a friend, not a beast." The horse stepped forward, and Celeste swayed, nearly falling. Isaiah's hand pressed firm at her back, steadying her. His warmth and the scent of hide and prairie air closed around her. She dared not breathe, afraid her heart would betray its rush. Day by day, he led her farther, through the timber, across barren fields. She began to feel the rhythm of the saddle, the wind slapping her cheeks, her hair streaming free. Once, when the gelding reared sudden, she gasped in fear. Isaiah's arms swept around her, pulling her tight against his chest, holding her fast. Only moments, yet her heart raced long after. One afternoon, Isaiah brought out his old Winchester. He laid it in her hands. The weight sagged her arms. He stepped behind, large hands closing over her wrists, raising the barrel. "Don't think about hitting. Just hold steady." The cold of steel mingled with the musk of horse and leather. His breath warmed the back of her neck. "Sight with your eyes, but hold with your heart." "Don't shake." She drew a breath, pulled the trigger. The crack split, the valley wide. The shot flew wild, but Celeste broke into laughter. The tension shattered. Isaiah reclaimed the rifle, checked it, then nodded once. "Better than my first try." The rare words brought heat to her cheeks, her pulse racing. In the cabin, they shared the work of meals. Celeste had never known a wood stove or iron pot. Her first cornbread burned bitter. Isaiah said nothing, only poured her a cup of milk and set it before her. "Do it again." No rebuke, no weariness, only patience that filled her chest with quiet gratitude. The second attempt baked golden. Celeste smiled shyly, lifting her head to find his eyes on her. In the firelight, his gaze lingered longer than usual, a silent acknowledgement of her effort. Day followed day. Water carried, fires coaxed, saddles mounted, rifle steadied, bread baked. Small tasks, yet each one bound Celeste closer to the life she had never imagined. and beside her was a man of few words, with eyes like deep stone and hands that always reached at the moment she faltered. At night, on the straw mattress under the hide, Celeste lay listening to his weight shifting on the floorboards. In that darkness, she understood. It was in those quiet hours, in the brush of hands at the well, the steady arm on the saddle, the closeness at the rifle's stock, that something had begun to grow inside her. Not pity, but trust, and beyond that, a feeling she dared not yet name. The fever struck without warning, as though Celeste's body had finally surrendered after days of forcing itself into frontier work. In the morning, it was only a chill crawling along her spine. By dusk, her breath came ragged, her skin burning. She tried to hide it, unwilling to burden Isaiah, but when her hands shook carrying the water buckets, he saw at once. "That's enough," Isaiah said, voice rough yet firm. He took the bucket from her, set it down, and studied her flushed face. "You've got a fever." She tried to argue, but her legs faltered. Isaiah's hand caught her waist, steadying her, lifting her as though she weighed no more than a child. His touch was solid, warm, holding her whole frame as if nothing could slip through his grasp. Celeste wanted to whisper thanks, but her throat burned dry, spilling only broken breaths. He laid her on the narrow bed, drew the hide blanket across her chest. The fire roared higher, flames chasing shadows along the cabin walls. He wet a cloth and laid it on her brow. His movements were slow, careful, as if a misstep might break her apart. All night, he kept vigil. At times he replaced the cloth, lifted her to sip water. When her breath grew harsh, he reached for an old book from the shelf and read aloud. His voice, deep, steady, weathered as the wind itself, droned like a low hymn, each word holding her tethered against the fever's storm. Through the haze she caught fragments, a line of verse. "Though the night be long and cold, I will wait until you find your song again." In her delirium, she felt as though her hand was locked in his, clinging to life itself. When dawn seeped pale through the shutters, Celeste opened her eyes, her head still heavy, but the heat gone. The first sight was not the cabin, nor the fire, but Isaiah, slumped in the chair beside her bed, his large hand clasped tight around hers. She squeezed faintly. Even in sleep, his grip answered, holding fast. Her heart stung, warm and aching at once, as though every wound in her life had found balm in his calloused palm. The next day, Isaiah returned to chores as if nothing had passed. He did not mention her fever, nor the night he had kept watch. Only Celeste carried it in silence, the memory of a man who never left her side, whose hand had never let go. That evening, snow fell heavy outside, cloaking the pines. Inside, the fire cast a gentle gold on the wooden walls. Celeste lay awake on the bed, her heart restless, as though something within her clamored to be named. She heard the door creak, the wind rush in as Isaiah returned from the stable. He hung his hat, sat near the hearth, warming his hands. Firelight flickered across his face, stern, quiet, but in his eyes something deeper stirred, something that drew her gaze and would not release it. Her lips parted. "Isaiah." He turned, waiting. No question, no urging, only silence, holding space. Celeste rose, the hide sliding from her shoulders. Bare feet pressed, cold to the boards, but her heart burned hot. She crossed to the hearth, stopping just short of him. "Thank you for staying with me," she whispered. He did not answer at once. Instead, he reached, brushing a stray lock from her brow. The touch was so light, yet it sent a tremor through her. Their eyes held, longer than ever before. In his gaze she saw it plain, not pity, not duty, choice. The distance closed when Isaiah leaned forward, forehead resting against hers. Not hurried, but still. Their breaths mingled. Celeste let her eyes fall shut, surrendering to the truth she could no longer resist. His lips touched hers, tentative, unpolished, but honest, as if they had been waiting all this time. The fire crackled, snow thickened outside. Yet within the cabin, silence was broken only by the rhythm of two hearts meeting. Isaiah's arm circled her waist, drawing her close. She leaned into him, trembling but unafraid. That night, they gave to each other what words could not bear. Not a blaze, but a steady warmth, a river of closeness running deep and slow like ice thawing in the mountain's core. Celeste felt his hand tracing her back, each kiss tender, each breath heavy yet gentle. For her, it was more than closeness. It was proof. Proof that she, cast off and branded, was still worthy of being chosen. For him, it was more than sheltering another. It was life itself returned to a home that had known only silence. As the fire sank to embers, they lay together on the wooden bed. Celeste rested her head on Isaiah's chest, listening to the heartbeat. Steady, strong, sure. She whispered, faint as breath itself, "For the first time, I feel chosen." Isaiah's arm tightened, wordless, his long exhale the only answer she needed. Outside, the snow fell heavy still, but inside that cabin, the night belonged to them. A night of warmth, a night that bound them past the point of return. That afternoon, the sky thickened into a heavy slate gray, the kind that warned of a storm rolling fast from the mountains. Celeste sat at the rough wooden table, peeling wild potatoes for supper. The fire popped in the hearth, light flickering across her dark eyes. Isaiah sat by the door, running a whetstone along his knife in slow strokes. From time to time, his gaze drifted toward her. All was still until the sound of hooves carried in from the distance, hard and deliberate. Isaiah lifted his head. The sound grew nearer until a lone rider broke through the trees. The man wore a long black coat, shoulders crusted with ice, a rifle strapped across his back, and iron cuffs swinging at his hip. His face was as cold as the wind that trailed him. He stopped at the porch. "Isaiah Carter?" His voice rasped, without pretense. Isaiah rose, shoulders squared. "Who's asking?" The stranger pulled a folded sheet from his coat. The paper shook in the wind, but the words stood clear. Wanted, Celeste Brown. Crime, theft of dowry, fleeing lawful betrothal. Reward, $2,000, dead or alive. Celeste heard every word. Her heart hammered so loud it drowned the crackle of the fire. The knife slipped from her fingers, clattering on the table. Isaiah took the paper, read slow, then looked up. She came through. Then she left. I gave her food. She moved on 2 days back. The bounty hunter narrowed his eyes. "You let a criminal walk?" Isaiah folded the warrant and pressed it back into his hand. "I saw a hungry girl. If the law wants to call her a thief, then my eyes saw nothing." The air went taut. Snow drifted. Wind howled in the pines. The hunter's hand hovered near his pistol. Isaiah didn't flinch. Their stares cut like steel blades drawn edge to edge. At last, The man sucked in a breath and tugged his reins. "If she shows here again, Carter, you'll answer for it." He jerked his horse around, hooves pounding the frozen trail until his figure vanished into the storm. Isaiah stood watching, waiting until the rider was gone. Then he turned back inside, only to find the bed empty, the back door ajar. Celeste was gone. She had sat frozen on the edge of the bed, fists clutching the hide blanket, the image of that warrant burning into her mind. Each word carved like a blade. As Isaiah faced the hunter outside, one thought took hold. She had to disappear before her presence brought ruin on him. Celeste rose, crossed the room in quick strides. The back door gave easily, latch loose from age. She pulled the scarf over her face and stepped into the white blur of wind. The hinge groaned, swallowed by the gale, never reaching Isaiah's ears. Minutes later, when he came back in, the cabin was hollow. Fire still burned. Potatoes half peeled lay on the table, but the bed was stripped, blanket tossed aside. Isaiah's brow furrowed. He scanned the room. The front door closed, but the draft was wrong. He turned, saw the back door shuddering in the off-zone wind. His chest clenched tight. "Damn it!" he muttered, bolting out. Fresh tracks marred the snow, small feet, staggering but swift, pressing deep toward the woods. Isaiah seized his saddle, pulled the reins tight, and swung into the gray's back. The horse cried out, then lunged forward, hooves drumming against the frozen ground. Snow stung his face, cutting like glass. He bent low, eyes fixed on the faint trail ahead. Fury and fear tangled in him. He knew she hadn't run from cowardice. She had run to spare him the cost of her shadow. That reckless self-sacrifice twisted his gut, left him both angry and aching. Each bend of the trail, he feared the storm would swallow her prints, but the dents still marked the white, guiding him on. At last, as dusk spread orange across the peaks, he saw her. Celeste had collapsed against a rock face, knees drawn tight, hair dusted with snow, face pale as ash. Snow fell heavy, blanketing the narrow valley in white. In the fading light, the gorge opened like a wound in the earth, a dark cleft swallowing the wind. Isaiah urged his gray deeper inside, the horse's breath steaming into the storm. Hoofbeats echoed against the frozen walls, guiding him to the figure he sought. There, beneath an outcropping of stone that gave scant shelter from the storm, Celeste sat, curled tight, arms wrapped around her knees. Her thin dress clung damp with melt, her hair tangled, her eyes red from cold and weeping. At the sound of hooves, she lifted her head, gaze a mix of shock and despair. "You shouldn't have come after me," she rasped, voice raw as stone under wind. "I only bring you trouble." "I'm not worth saving." Isaiah dismounted, each step sinking deep, heavy as a drumbeat. He knelt before her, his dark eyes fixed on her tear-streaked face. "Celeste," his voice low, unyielding, "I don't need your innocence. I need you here." The words rang in the gorge, carried by the storm's howl. Celeste froze, lips trembling. She shook her head, tears spilling fresh. "You don't understand. To them, I'm a thief, a runaway bride. They'll never forgive me. And if you stay with me, you'll bear their scorn too." Isaiah took her hands, icy and stiff, pressing them in his calloused palms. "They can call you anything. But I know who you are. I've seen you fight hunger, seen you live when the world told you to bow. That's the truth I hold. Celeste sobbed, dropping her brow to his shoulder. His chest was warm, steady, the heat of him melting the cold that gnawed her thin frame. His arms closed around her, not binding, but solid, a wall against the storm. "I've always been left behind," she whispered. "My father sold me off like barter. People see only shame when they look at me. I don't believe I deserve to stay in anyone's arms." Isaiah shook his head. "You don't carry the past alone. If there's weight to bear, then we bear it together. I lived thinking nothing in this world was worth holding. But now, I know what I need to keep." Silence stretched long. The gale outside the canyon seemed far away, drowned out by the sound of two hearts against each other. Celeste lifted her face, eyes wet, but holding a glimmer. "Are you sure?" Her question wavered like a thread ready to snap. Isaiah didn't hesitate. He lifted her hand, pressed it to his chest. "Do you hear it? This beat doesn't live for me anymore. It lives for you." For us, Celeste broke into tears again. But this time they weren't of despair. Her shoulders shook, then eased, her body yielding into his embrace. They sat there until the storm calmed, until the canyon grew still. A new moon broke through the clouds, spilling silver light across the snow. In that glow, Isaiah pulled off his glove, clasping her hand in his bare one, sealing the bond like a mark carved in stone. "I promise," he said, each word weighted like iron. "You'll never be alone again. No matter what they call you, no matter what shadows chase us, you will always have a place to return." Celeste stilled, then nodded, placing her other hand over his, closing her eyes as if to hold the vow inside her bones. In that canyon, no chapel, no witness, only snow, moonlight, and two broken souls who chose each other. By the time they returned to the cabin, night had deepened. Celeste stepped inside first, her eyes rimmed red but her stride steadier. Isaiah stoked the fire, flames rising bright to banish the damp cold. She stood watching, then turned softly. "I don't know what the future holds," she murmured, "but I want to try trusting, at least once." Isaiah crossed to her, laying a hand on her shoulder. "Then trust in us." Their eyes met. No further words were needed. In the fire's glow, in the warmth of the wooden walls, they spoke a vow louder than any voice, born of canyon snow, trembling hands, and two hearts daring to believe again. That night, Celeste slept sound, free of fevered dreams. Beside her, Isaiah lay on the floor as always, but his hand rested lightly on the edge of her bed, a thread binding them. And for the first time in years, both knew the shape of sleep that was no longer lonely. Rumor ran quicker than the winter wind. Within a week of the bounty hunter's visit, every corner of Dry Creek whispered Celeste's name. Wanted posters spread like fire, on the saloon door, the church bulletin board, even across the blacksmith's window. The drawing was crude, hardly more than smudges, yet the words blazed in scarlet. Runaway bride, theft of dowry, reward $2,000. Celeste walked the market street with a wicker basket at her arm. Voices hushed as she passed. A mother drew her child aside, murmuring, "That's her, the colored girl. They say she swindled a fine family." A fabric seller jutted her chin, saying to no one in particular, "Harbor her, and the whole town's name will rot." Celeste kept her head low, fingers gripping the handle until her knuckles whitened. Shame pressed heavier than the looks cast at her back. At a vegetable stall, the vendor crossed his arms, his silence sharper than any insult. She set down her coins, but no goods changed hands. Swallowing hard, she turned away. Isaiah followed close behind, watching it all. His jaw stayed hard, veins tight on his fists as he held the reins. He wanted to strike out, to smash their poisoned stares, but he only stepped nearer, broad shoulders breaking some of the weight off her. The louder the rumor, the crueler the sport. One night in the saloon, a drunk smashed his bottle against the floor, shouting, "Carter, word is you're feeding a bird worth $2,000. Better sell her than keep her belly full." Laughter rose sharp, bouncing off the timbered walls. Isaiah turned, gaze hard as iron. The room hushed at once. He said nothing, laid his coins on the bar, and guided Celeste outside. Yet the silence cut her deeper, for the shadow of that poster followed her every step. That night, she could not sleep. She sat at the window, staring into the white prairie, tears slipping down her face. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "My being here only lays more weight on you." Isaiah came beside her, hand resting firm on her shoulder. "Celeste, don't you see? I've lived years in silence, under the town's suspicion. I've grown used to judgment. But you are the reason I've found something worth standing for." She lifted her eyes to him, trembling at the steadiness she found there. But fear still clung, the shadow of her past unwilling to release its hold. Then something no one expected. At the next week's market, when the crowd gathered before the general store to mutter about her, a woman's voice rose, frail, shaking, but clear. "I remember. It was her who saved my child from fever." The murmurs stilled. Widow Delaney, keeper of the small apothecary, stepped forward, hands trembling with age, but eyes hard as steel. "Clara was near death, the doctor gone from town." Celeste sat all night at her bedside, boiling herbs, reading the good book. "Clara breathes today because of her a ripple moved through the people." Then another voice, rough yet warm, broke in. Reverend Calhoun, hair white as snow, came from the chapel steps. "I do not know the truth of the charges, but I know this woman knelt in prayer for an orphan child. I know she gave soup to a drunk no one else would touch. We are too quick to forget mercy." The crowd faltered. Then the blacksmith, John McKay, broad-shouldered and soot-streaked, laid down his hammer and stepped out. His voice boomed. "Last month my horse near broke its leg." She stayed through the night, binding it as though it were her own. "If she's a criminal, then I say criminals can show more grace than most honest men." His words landed heavy, like hammer on anvil. Some bowed their heads, others pressed lips tight in shame. Celeste stood apart, basket empty, hands shaking. Never had she thought anyone would risk speaking for her. Their words, simple and plain, pierced her heart like sunlight through storm cloud. Isaiah stepped forward then, placing himself in the circle of their eyes. His voice carried steady. "You can choose to believe a piece of paper. I choose to believe what I've seen, and I will stand with Celeste." "No one can take that from me," silence answered. But it was not the silence of scorn. It was the silence of unsettled hearts. The posters still hung. The whispers still lingered. But cracks had begun to form. That evening, as they rode back toward the cabin, Celeste gripped his hand tight. Her eyes rimmed red, but lit with a fragile glow. "I never thought anyone would remember." The small things I did. I thought they were all gone. Isaiah's grip tightened. Nothing is ever gone. It only takes one voice to bring truth back to light. In the quiet of that winter dusk, both of them knew. The town still judged, but now there were voices that dared to speak otherwise. And within those voices lay the first fragile seed of redemption. That morning, the sky hung heavy with gray, the wind rattling the wooden eaves like loose bones. Dry Creek was still the same small town tucked in the valley, but rumor had swelled into something no one could ignore. The name Celeste Brown was now spoken louder than the church bells. Isaiah Carter knew it. He tied his horse outside the cabin, rolled the bounty notice tight, and slid it into his belt. Celeste's eyes brimmed as she asked, "What are you going to do?" He only set his hand gently on her shoulder and answered, "What I should have done long ago." The town square was nothing more than a packed dirt clearing hemmed in by church, saloon, and forge. But that day, it brimmed with people. Word had spread. Carter had something to say about the runaway bride thief. Faces craned forward, children peeked from behind skirts, and murmurs rose like gnats. Isaiah walked in, horse at his side, each step heavy but unshaken. He stopped dead center, pulled out the bounty sheet, and raised it high. The paper flapped in the bleak wind. Wanted. Celeste Brown stark against the dim light. "This," his voice rang out, "is what you've been whispering all week. This is the sentence a stranger wants to press on this town. But today I say no more rumors. Today, we face truth." From the front row, a man barked, "What truth?" Black ink on white paper ain't enough. Isaiah's eyes swept across them. This was written by a rich man in Georgia. A man with money, with power, but who's never set foot on this soil. And me? He clenched the paper. "I've lived with her, I've seen her, and I know Celeste Brown is nothing of what this ink claims." Murmurs rippled. A shopkeeper shook her head, yet some glanced sideways at one another, unsure. "You call her a thief?" Isaiah pressed on. "I call her a survivor." "You call her a runaway?" "I call her brave enough to break chains that would have killed her soul." His breath deepened, voice steady as stone. "She is my choice." The words struck like hammer blows. A hush fell, thick as snowfall. Then Widow Delaney shuffled forward, her frail voice trembling but clear. "Carter speaks truth. My daughter breathes today because Celeste sat through the fever night, stirring followed. Reverend Calhoun stepped up, silver hair catching what little light broke the clouds. I wrote Cheyenne myself. I don't know her every past, but I know her present. And in the present, she is no criminal. She is proof grace still walks among us." The blacksmith McKay pushed through, broad chest dusted with soot. His words boomed like iron striking anvil. "She saved my horse, saved my living. If she's a thief, then call me her accomplice. I'll stand with her." The crowd shifted, the air quivering. A few lowered eyes, others sighed deep, but a voice shouted, "What about this paper? Do we spit on the law?" Isaiah lifted it again, then suddenly crushed it in his fist. The tearing rasp echoed through the square. He let the shreds scatter in the wind. "Law," he thundered. "This law was bought by a man who would chain a woman, call her property. If that's justice, then justice is already rotted." Celeste stood hidden in the blacksmith's doorway, tears streaming. Isaiah's back was a wall before her, each word he spoke hammering her name back into honor she thought forever lost. Sheriff Dobson, who had until then stood silent, finally stepped forward. Removing his hat, he looked from face to face. "You've heard enough. We can obey the paper, or we can remember who she really is. The choice is ours." A silence fell, then a single voice. "I'll believe her." Another joined. "She deserves her chance." The words spread, gathering strength until they filled the square. "That's right. She's no criminal. She belongs with us." Celeste covered her mouth. A sob caught in her throat. The sheriff nodded. Then it settled. "I'll write to Cheyenne myself. Dry Creek will not hunt Celeste Brown. Here she is no outlaw. Here she's one of us." The sound that rose wasn't wild celebration. It was deeper, quieter. A sound of release, of grudges dropping, faces softened. An old woman tipped her chin in greeting to Celeste. An orphan boy ran to her, pressing a peppermint into her hand. Isaiah turned then, and their eyes met. She stood trembling, tears on her cheeks, lips curved in a fragile smile. He walked to her, held out his hand, and before all of Dry Creek, she placed hers into it. The square fell still, as if all knew they'd witnessed something greater than rumor or law. No vows spoken, no signatures drawn, only one man who dared choose, and one woman who dared accept. That was the truest trial, and the verdict did not come from paper or power, but from the heart of a community that finally remembered its own mercy. That spring came earlier than most. The snow melted fast, giving way to fresh blades of grass that spread like a green carpet beneath the mountains. Out on a meadow beyond Dry Creek, a lone wild tree bloomed white, its petals trembling in the breeze. That was the place Isaiah chose for the wedding. No church, no bells, no grandeur. Only earth, sky, and the few souls who mattered. That day, Celeste stepped out from the small cabin in a simple cotton dress, mended in places but clean and proud. The only necklace she wore was her mother's keepsake, plain wooden beads carrying years of memory. Her hair was braided, tucked with a wildflower plucked from the creek that morning. No powder, no silk, but the light in her eyes outshone the season itself. Isaiah waited beneath the tree, his white shirt worn but pressed, his brown trousers and scuffed boots speaking of years of labor. No boutonniere, no coat, yet his stance, straight and steadfast, was enough to command the land around him. A handful of witnesses gathered. Widow Delaney sat in the front row, clutching her daughter Clara's hand. Reverend Calhoun carried his weathered Bible, his expression both kind and grave. John McKay, the blacksmith, stood tall behind them, his broad shoulders sheltering the orphans who had tagged along. Not a crowd, but the ones who believed this love was worth standing witness to. The Reverend opened the book, his voice warm and steady. "We gather not to forget the past, but to begin a future. Love here does not require fine words or distant witnesses, only two hearts willing to vow." Celeste walked forward, her steps barely bending the grass. Isaiah's eyes followed, each moment carved deep into memory. When she reached him, the wind lifted a stray blossom from her hair, and he bent to take her hand. Small, thin, but alive with warmth. The Reverend nodded. "Isaiah Carter, have you words to vow?" Isaiah drew a breath, eyes fixed on hers. His voice came rough but firm. "I have no gold, no titles to offer you. What I carry is silence and storm, long nights alone, mornings born of harsh wind. All of that I give to you, and if you take it, these hands will keep the fire for us through every winter." Celeste trembled, her tears bright as her smile. The Reverend turned. "Celeste Brown, have you words to vow?" Her voice shook, yet every syllable rang clear. "I once thought life could only be lived in fear, in running. But you gave me a place to stand, a gaze without judgment. Today I vow to keep the fire in our home, and to keep your honor. So when they speak your name, Isaiah Carter, they know it belongs to a man loved with all my heart." Silence swept the meadow. Only the wind through the branches and the steady beating of two hearts filled the space. The Reverend closed his Bible. No golden bands, no signed papers. From this day, beneath God's eyes, beneath Wyoming's sky, the two of you are husband and wife. Isaiah and Celeste did not kiss in spectacle. They bowed their heads, foreheads touching, breath mingling. It was not for display, but for sealing. In that hush, they both knew they belonged to each other. Those gathered bowed their heads. Widow Delaney wept softly, clutching her child. John McKay laid a rough hand on Isaiah's shoulder, his nod carrying blessing. The Reverend's smile broke gentle and bright, as if he'd glimpsed a quiet miracle in this hard land. Celeste whispered, low enough only he could hear, "From this day I am no runaway. I am your wife." Isaiah tightened his grip, "and I will always be the man who chose you." The wild tree stirred in the breeze, its white petals drifting down like a blessing on their vows. No horns, no fireworks, yet the meadow shone brighter than any grand cathedral, built on faith, on courage, on the love of two souls who once believed they had nothing left to lose. Years passed since that spring day when, beneath a wild tree in bloom, Celeste and Isaiah pledged themselves to one another. Winter followed winter, the snow falling and melting again. Yet inside the mountain cabin, one thing never faded: laughter. The wooden cabin that had once been hollow and dim now pulsed with life. At the old table where Isaiah once sat alone sharpening knives, children now crowded, drumming with their palms, sometimes scrawling crooked drawings with bits of charcoal. Celeste scolded, laughed, then wiped it clean, never able to stay stern for long. By the fire she sat with knitting needles, weaving soft wool into sweaters. The flames danced on her gentle face, her gaze drifting to the window, where small feet raced across the yard, shoes buried in spring grass. The eldest boy, a mirror of Isaiah with dark, steady eyes, pulled his younger siblings along, their laughter ringing out like silver bells. Isaiah, tall and lean as ever, though streaked now with gray, worked in the woodshop. His calloused hands guided the chisel, each stroke firm. Before him lay a cradle for their youngest. Into its side he carved wildflowers, the same blossoms that had fallen into Celeste's hair on their wedding day. Each mark carried memory, each curve a vow that their children would grow in peace, rested from storms and judgment. One afternoon, Celeste stepped inside, unfinished knitting in hand. She paused, watching him carve a small sprig of clover. "You still remember?" she asked softly. Isaiah lifted his eyes, steady as stone. "I remember it all. You in the snow, clutching bread as if it were treasure. The day you looked at me as though I truly saw you. This cradle ought to bear those marks." Her hand rested warm on his shoulder. They said no more, Yet the silence held more than words could carry. That summer, townsfolk from Dry Creek came often. No one whispered of warrants anymore. They came seeking Isaiah's tools, Celeste's herbs, or simply the joy of children's laughter echoing across the yard. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now belonged to the community. Widow Delaney arrived with baskets of pastries to help the little ones grow. Reverend Calhoun visited to teach letters, carving alphabets on wood blocks. John McKay, the blacksmith, dropped to the floor for tug-of-war with the children, red-faced in defeat, but roaring with laughter. Celeste watched it all, heart swelling with a strange knowing. This home was no longer only for their family, but for all who needed shelter. She remembered the girl she once was, lost, hungry, chased away at a bakery's trash bin. Now, the same roof opened wide for others. One evening, as the sun dipped gold over the fields, Celeste sat on the porch with a nearly finished sweater in her lap. Isaiah stepped out, setting down the new cradle beside her. The sunset glowed across the carvings, wild blooms, clovers, and two hands entwined. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her slamaho, fingers tracing the grooves. Isaiah nodded, then revealed a wooden plaque. Into it, he had carved, "Where a loaf was given, a home was born." Celeste froze. Tears welled, spilling hot down her cheeks. She remembered that snowy day, the bread Isaiah had placed in her hands. From that small act had sprung everything: a house, a family, a legacy. She turned, her smile trembling yet radiant. "We did it." Isaiah laid his rough hand over hers. He said nothing, but his eyes, deep, unwavering, spoke all the answer she needed. In the years to come, the plaque hung above their door. Travelers paused to read it, a reminder that kindness could begin an entire life anew. Children raised beneath that roof grew up with memories of tenderness and resilience etched in their hearts. One late afternoon, as flocks crossed the sky in migration, Celeste held their youngest, humming a lullaby. Isaiah whittled nearby, his gaze slipping often to the meadow where the older children played. They spoke no words, but the silence brimmed with love, choice, and the promise of what they would leave behind. The cabin, once cold and hollow, became a beacon, and the simple plaque on its porch told the story for generations. Where a loaf was given, a home was born. On that wild land, once filled with wind, snow, and judgment, a house rose full of laughter. Celeste and Isaiah proved happiness need not begin with gold, only with a loaf of bread given in mercy. From that gift, a family and a legacy had grown, dear friends. Perhaps by now we all know storms and the wounds of judgment or loss. Yet this tale reminds us, one hand extended, one gaze that truly sees, can change an entire life. If this story has warmed your heart, please press like so we may know it has touched you. Subscribe so together we can keep the fire of these Wild West love stories burning. And leave a comment. Share your memory, your lesson, or your blessing, so we may weave a tapestry of stories to hand down to the next generation. Tell us, do you believe a simple loaf of bread can begin a home like this?